Hi, I'm Franklin Kasman. It's my opportunity and great pleasure to interview my mentor and one of my best friends, my partner, Jerry Siegel, for this
And I'm
series.
Jerry Siegel.
For this series on Masters for the Video GI Forum. So, Jerry, I wanted to start this interview with a little conversation back in what got you started in medicine, and a little bit about where you began and how it got to gastroenterology.
Okay, when I was about 5 years old, I wanted to be a doctor, and everybody called me Dr. Jerry. So that I fulfilled that dream. On the way, there was a a conflict that was taking place in Korea, so I went into pharmacy so that I could go into the service as an officer. Then I went to the University of Georgia to get a degree in chemistry while I was completing my pre-medical requirements. That's where I met Beverly. We were married before I was accepted to medical school. I did get accepted to the Medical College of Georgia. So contrary to the perception that I'm a native New Yorker, I consider myself native now, but only after 45 years. So go ahead, Ed. After the medical college, I wanted to start moving north. And so I completed a rotating internship in Allentown, Pennsylvania. At that time, I thought maybe I'd be a general practitioner. I met Herbert Hyman, who was a gastroenterologist carrying around what looked like a machine gun. And it was one of the earlier semi-rigid endoscopes that he would use for endoscopy. Remember, all we could do was go down a bit with these instruments that were battery operated. You had a light bulb, you had a battery, and you had poor visibility. And one thing I think you remember, because you were there, we had optical instruments in the beginning. So as we progressed with fiber optics, we still had an optical instrument through which we looked, holding the instrument with one hand and looking, and then trying to use the other hand to control the dials and to use any accessories.
What year, I'll interrupt for a second, what year did you first get your hands on or first lay your eyes on an endoscope of any sort then?
This was in 1965. In between the internship and my residency, GI fellowship or residency, I served in the United States Air Force. And was a flight surgeon. So I went to the School of Aerospace Medicine. I said, gosh, I could be a cardiologist. I could be an astronaut. Anyway, when I was applying, I said, general medicine or medicine itself is what I really want to do. And so I applied to the Veterans Administration Hospital in the Bronx, New York, which at that time was part of Columbia Presbyterian. So we rotated through Columbia while working at the Bronx. And that's in 1965 was when Henry Coulter and Charles Flood, both of whom were presidents of the ASGE. Henry was a president of the ACG. Flood was a founding member of the ASGE. And we worked together with some of these rudimentary endoscopes. Henry Coulter had a Hershowitz instrument, which was the first flexible fiber optic instrument, but it had no, it had no port for biopsies. You could not aspirate or do anything like that. So the patient would fast 24 hours before the endoscopy. And then before we put the endoscope down, we would put a red tube, an E-wall tube, and suck out whatever was gastric content.
Oh, gosh.
And then the scope would go down, and unfortunately, when it was limited to the stomach, we really couldn't see the esophagus. And Henry liked 16 millimeter movies. He wanted everything in moving color. And so the endoscope with an incandescent bulb would sit on the greater curvature of the stomach while he was photographing. And unbelievable, just like Schindler. He could see something and say, that's a superficial carcinoma. And we're saying, how could you tell that?
Amazing.
Because he worked with all the other preliminary instruments as well.
So that at some point, of course, you got a real itch for therapeutics, and you went from the VA and moved on to some additional training elsewhere.
Yeah, well, there was a 7-year interval because Henry Coulter loaned me a Hershowitz instrument to take to Atlanta. I went into practice in Atlanta with a cardiologist. At that time, GI fellowships, we learned fluoroscopy, and we did barium enemas and gallbladder series and GI series, and we reported directly to the chief of radiology. So my partner got an X-ray machine, a fluoroscope, and we did all kinds of X-ray procedures as well as using the Hershowitz. One other point historically, also from ACMI, Lopresti made an instrument that was fully fiber optic. The light bundle was fiber optic, so it was a cool light. And again, though, it was short, but it was oblique, and it was the first time we actually saw the esophagus. So that was a revelation. All right, so in Atlanta, colonoscopy started coming out, and then the joystick ACMI gastroscope, which was actually long enough to get into the duodenum. And you actually, at some point, could take biopsies. We adapted cameras, we adapted all kinds of things so that we could document what we were doing. And from that point, I saw what was happening. There was an evolution in endoscopy and in liver disease. So I applied to the University of London, to Sheila Sherlock, Dame Sheila, Professor Sheila Sherlock,
Right.
and said, I want to come over and work in liver disease. ERCP was just beginning. She said, you'll come over and do ERCP with the other two guys that are doing it.
Which was who?
Summerfield and I'll get his name because I was just mentioning his name before. He was from Wales. Summerfield was from London. And every Tuesday and Thursday, they would do ERCP, but they had first gone to Peter Cotton at the Middlesex Hospital, Elwyn Elias, John Summerfield, Elwyn Elias. So I worked with them just trying to see what they were doing with the ERCP, and stayed there for 2 years. Fortunately, one of Sheila Sherlock's former fellows, William Rosenthal, was coming for the annual meeting that she had every year, and she arranged to have me interview with him for a job in New York.
In New York.
So from London to New York.
Right, and then New York Medical College.
The New York Medical College, Flower Fifth Avenue, which ultimately moved.
So you started doing ERCPs under Bill Rosenthal, or at least in his division, or did you first get some more training?
No, it was by the seat of the pants, as we all did then. No, there was no training program. So they had an instrument that had a metal tip.
Right.
So obviously, when you started doing therapeutic endoscopy, you would short out the electric because it was a conductive tip. And the serial number on that scope, I'll never forget, was 00000035. It was like one of the first instruments with black dots all over from the broken fiber optic.
Now, sphincterotomy, though, you did go train in Europe a little bit, right? We know you're a disciple of Laszlo's.
What was really significant was the Germans and Japanese had already reported ERCP in large series, and then they were reporting sphincterotomy. And this guy in Münster, who was a Hungarian immigrant, Laszlo Safrani, had written a paper in gastroenterology that was his first 280 or so sphincterotomies. So I said, I want to do sphincterotomies. And Rosenthal said, not until you go and train with somebody. So I contacted Laszlo, and a month or so later, I went and spent time with him as part of his team, learning the techniques of sphincterotomy. Now, mind you, going back, we had an ERCP scope, but we didn't have any accessories.
Right.
We didn't have any sphinctertomes, we had nothing.
So you had to be, you had to learn to build an electroset.
So fortunately, while I was in Münster, there was a man from a company who had sphincterotomes and baskets.
Yeah.
And so I ordered a whole supply, and I had a technician in New York who could repair those. In those days, we could use them over and over again, as you know.
So question, you have this particular way of doing sphincterotomy. We call it the New York sphincterotomy. It's big and opening and welcome. Was that Laszlo's style, or did you develop that that concept on your own, the way you cut? Because that's the way I cut, and that's the way we've been teaching our own students.
Except on weekends.
Exactly.
Except on weekends. I mean, Franklin was doing a procedure, and I said, cut more, cut more, cut more. And he said, it's Friday afternoon, I'm on call, you're not. And he said, if you want to cut more, you're on call.
But Safrani, did
Yeah,
you
what happened,
adapt his technique?
The original sphincterotomes were 4 centimeter wire. The wire was 4 centimeters in length. And so you put the whole thing in and you just cut.
Okay.
And of course you could perforate, and we realized later you don't need that much wire, you're cutting with the tip. And so that's how we developed that. And then there was enough data later on that the more maximum sphincterotomy, the better the flow and the less recurrence of stenosis.
Let's turn a little bit to what you've accomplished over your career after going through all of the training and development. You've really added a tremendous amount to New York and to the literature. Tell us a little bit about your contributions with regards to servicing the community, first of all, when there was no one else that did what you did. Tell us about how you managed that. And how many people you taught, and then we'll talk a little bit about what you've developed.
Well, interestingly, a lot of this was intuitive while we were doing the procedure. So I'd read that Nib Sahindra had put a pigtail stent into somebody's bile duct, and so I said, where in the world do you get that? So we walked into interventional radiology, as you did while you were working with me, and we said, I need a 7 or 8 French single pigtail. And the radiologist would look at us and say, what are you doing with that? And we say, well, we're going to cut off the length we need. How are you going to get it in the bile duct? I said, we're using the Seldinger technique.
Yeah.
The guide wire technique, once the guide wire is in place and secured, then we just keep exchanging. And so we started with that, and then we started making our own equipment. First of all, the sphincterotomes we repaired, baskets were there. There were no balloons until later. The FDA did not have any approval for any of the companies in the United States. So I called up Cook Company and I said, we're using this guide wire. We need a Seldinger Van Andel type of catheter that's 180 centimeters in length that we can use to pass a wire and inject contrast at the same time. So they made us a series of dilating catheters,
And you basically
7 French to 12. So that we could
develop the technique of wire-guided cannulation.
And then I had a patent pending for a double lumen
sphincterotome, right? Early
double lumen stent in which we could put iridium.
And you also were a pioneer, one of the pioneers in needle knife sphincterotomy, right?
Well, we didn't have needle knife, so we improvised. We used the guide wire tip outside of the 7 French dilating catheter. So it was a little broader than the current needle knife, and we just started using that and cutting. The rest of the wire was contained within the plastic container, and the fellow would have to hold the wire, but with gloves with no holes, and use an alligator clip, and we hooked that up and we did a sphincterotomy or needle knife.
Jerry, you've been famous for traveling from hospital to hospital in New York and training people. Tell us a little bit about the evolution of ERCP under your tutelage in New York, in the area, New Jersey, Pennsylvania.
Well, that's really great because you learn from others that you share what you know with other doctors for the benefit of the patient. So people from around the area, the metropolitan area, would call and tell me they had this particular problem. Could I come over and do an ERCP? And it was a teaching experience. I always carried, again, going back to fiber optics, I always carried a teaching head so they could look, I could follow them while they were practicing. And I went to nearly 40 hospitals in the whole area, as you're doing now with several hospitals. We're carrying on that tradition. And it's very important that people know what we're doing. And we were responsible for the aftercare of the patient if something went wrong. And the doctor that was there took major responsibility, and if there was a problem, we would come running to that hospital to look after it.
How many people do you think you taught how to do ERCP to? Any guesses?
No, but I have to say that many of the training directors, like from Yale and Maimonides and other centers, would send their fellows for 3 to 6 months at the old hospital in which we worked. And they provided housing and also provided malpractice. And we drove around. They drove around with us, and we said they're okay to go, and they would go back to Yale or to the other hospital. So we did that for several years until Beth Israel, our home hospital, said we need to train our own fellows. And then in 1989, we established our own advanced endoscopy program.
Right. One of the first in the country, I think.
Yeah,
at that
it was
point.
privately endowed through our own practice. The first, Seth came before you, and then you followed, and you guys have been with me 26, 27 years.
Amazing. It's been wonderful.
Yeah.
What about the future? What do you have as an advice to current trainees? Any words of special wisdom?
Well, things are so much easier now in terms of having these big screen videos. But the advice is to persevere, and I think training directors, it's imperative that they determine whether or not these people have a good eye-hand coordination and feet, because we do have to dance with the fluoroscope, yes, as well as with the cautery. So if you find somebody who's really klutzy, and this was very important because Steve Silvas from Minneapolis, at the end of the person's training, he said, I will give you a letter of recommendation for upper endoscopy, for colonoscopy, but not ERCP. You're not there yet. And that's why we thought the 4th year training program would be so important if we selected somebody who had that ability. And you've been doing that now for years. You're the training director.
Wonderful.
Yeah, and it's been fantastic. So, you know, we improvised, we did what we did, we were careful and thoughtful. We certainly didn't do anything that was outrageous, but at the time it appeared that way because I was suspended from my hospital by the surgeons because they said, why are you doing, what are you doing? And they didn't understand that we could do something non-surgical. And it took a long time before they became our allies. And how did they become our allies? When they started doing laparoscopic cholecystectomy, and they had problems.
When they needed us.
And they called us and they said, okay, buddy, all right, buddy, help me out.
So can I end by asking you, was it fun? Have we had fun?
Oh,
It's been the best?
I think it's been the greatest career. I would have never imagined it. I have to give credit to my wife of 62 years, Beverly. We were married in college. She had confidence that I was going to go on. And when things were tough, she was right in there giving me the boost and helping me. And my family, you know, my daughter, grandchildren, daughter, son, grandchildren, all been very supportive. And I must say, off camera, I guess at some point, I'll tell you, you may have gotten something from one of our other hospitals, Hackensack.
Right.
A gift for serving time. I just got the second beautiful gift from them for 35 years or so. Have we ever received any
no
gratuity?
We don't ask for that. We're
from our own hospital.
We're grateful for what we've been given.
You can cut that, but
we're grateful for what we've had.
Yes.
It's been wonderful. It's been a wonderful career. You've been a great friend and mentor.
I'm sorry that I had to sort of give it up for a physical reason. Yes, but I'll stand behind you.
Yeah.
I'll stand behind you and
You're
stay
the best. Thank you so much.